This week on a podcast from beneath, The Changeling.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. The unburied dead are coming back to life, seeking human victims.
All right, so from when was this movie coming out? This came out in
1980.
1980. All right, The Changeling. I'll just ask this question: is this a gothic horror story in the classic sense of what a gothic horror story is, or is it just the setting that makes me think that?
Well, the setting would be in a gothic story. The setting would be an important aspect, right? The house that he's in is practically like a castle. So yes, I think it probably would be considered a gothic story. It's certainly going for that vibe, I would say. What brought you to think of this movie? Is there you have some special interest in it or preference for it?
So back before streaming and back before DVD, we would rent VHS tapes and then we would just record them, make copies of them. So we would have several tapes that would just have
Guilty.
three movies on each tape. We would just have all these, and I would say this was probably early 2000s, late 90s. Whenever I just put a tape in the VCR and this movie was on it, and it was late at night, and for some reason it creeped me out.
Yeah, there are some effective scenes in it.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about it for a while, and then I think I seen a trailer or something for it pop up somewhere, and I thought, oh yeah, I'd like to talk about that movie.
For me, this was my first watch of this film. I knew it existed, and Angelina Jolie did a great job. No, I'm joking. I know which one. That's funny when you put in The Changeling, when you're looking, it brings up her film, and it's just called Changeling. But anyway.
There's also a Star Trek episode called The Changeling.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
That's the one with the little floating robot.
Oh,
The little gray metal robot that floats around.
oh wow. And I don't want to get into Star Trek because I was like, I rewatched it. No, The Changeling, it's first off, George C. Scott is the GOAT. I mean, that guy, he's just a great actor. And I agree with Carey. It does have a gothic feel to it. These movies, it's kind of like, it turns me into Two-Face a little bit to watch these kinds of films, because one side of me is the guy's like, where's all the blood and guts and everything, and then there's the other side of me like, hey, stupid, pay attention to the story. So that's what the story is great, and really how it kicks off, you don't expect that, especially if you don't read into it. You just sit there and watch it. I'm like, holy crap, his daughter and his wife are on the side of the road, and he's trying to use a payphone. And this idiot's driving around, and he's swerving in the snow, and then he causes a dump truck to swerve off, and it just takes out his family.
How many dramas and horror films especially begin with traffic accidents that kill family members? I can't think of any other one right off the top of my head.
No, you're right. It does. But what I'm saying is, I didn't expect that. And yeah, I saw the car swerve. I'm like, I don't know what's going to go on. Are they going to hit? Is it going to hit them or what? But I love how it did that, to where, a dumb like me has to think, oh, okay, his family died. You don't see an ambulance. You don't see him go to the doctor's office. Like, what's wrong with my wife? It goes right to where, he's at now.
Well,
so I thought that was pretty cool.
It's particularly surprising because his wife is played by Jean Marsh, who at that time was a pretty prominent actress. She was acclaimed for her performance in Upstairs, Downstairs, which was a 70s British drama that was a big success here in the United States on Masterpiece Theater. I don't know if you remember back in the prehistoric times.
I know what Masterpiece Theater is.
I think Masterpiece Theater is still on the air, but Masterpiece Theater would bring British TV shows over to the United States. And of course, if it was British, then it was a masterpiece. That goes without saying, right?
Yeah.
But actually, Upstairs, Downstairs is a great show. And Jean Marsh was a talented actress. And what's surprising about that is and I had forgotten it because I hadn't seen this movie in years until I watched it for this. You're thinking, well, Jean Marsh is his wife. Surely they're going to have a scene together, at least. But she gets killed before the opening credits, right?
Yeah.
So that is surprising. And I assume that's intentional. The whole movie seems to be filled with character actors that we're probably familiar with from seeing them, like Barry Morse, the guy from The Fugitive and Space 1999, who pops up for I don't even know if it's a minute in the movie with a terrible accent. And the guy who plays his friend, the one that he visits before going onto the house, he's also a character actor that did a lot of TV. And that woman who plays Trish Van Devier's mother, that strange-looking woman, she was actually a regular on The Flying Nun. I don't know if you remember The Flying Nun.
Yeah.
No,
And she
it's
was
funny that you're saying that, but I mean, I grew up in my mom and all that. They watch that, so I know what you're talking about. I've seen this
Well,
stuff.
I'm surprised. I looked into it, and apparently, Flying Nun was on for 3 or 4 years.
Really?
Yeah. So I guess it was popular. But that same woman, I forget her name, Madeline Sherwood. She was also in an episode of Columbo, and so was Trish Van Devere. Trish Van Devere was in one episode that I particularly liked, where she plays a TV executive who bumps off her boyfriend, network executive. I don't know if you guys remember that one.
Wow.
But so there are 2 people in this that were in an episode of Columbo. The plot of this is a composer who is, I guess, supposed to be taken as a kind of Leonard Bernstein type character, very well respected. He's in the process of creating a new composition of some kind, a symphony or something like that. And I guess it's pre-credits, we see this traffic accident that you described where his wife and his young daughter are killed. And then after the opening credits, we see him sort of wandering around Manhattan near Lincoln Center. He's despondent and decides to sell his apartment in Manhattan and move to, I guess it's Seattle, to live in an old house, which is being leased to him by the Historical Society there. And once he gets himself settled in, he begins to hear strange sounds. And he eventually, through a bit of detection work that would have impressed Sherlock Holmes, he somehow figures out every detail of why this young boy is haunting the house. Spoilers, it's the boy was a cripple, and his father was afraid that he would die before he reached the age of 21. Apparently there was some sort of clause in a will that if he didn't survive to the age of 21, the money would go to charity. So the father is afraid of all the money dissipating, so he drowns the boy in his bathtub and takes a little boy from an orphanage and replaces him in his household. And that kid grows up to be a senator. And the senator is, I guess, a guy in his 80s in the movie. It's played by Melvin Douglas, who had a long career as a leading man in Hollywood going back to the 30s. Matter of fact, Melvin Douglas was in The Old Dark House, which was a 1932 James Whale movie with Boris Karloff, Charles Lawton, and Raymond Massey. Talk about a great cast.
Wonder where the others can be.
Listen, Bill, she hasn't told you everything.
Hasn't she? Why not?
Because she doesn't know everything herself. We're going to be married.
Oh, yeah.
At least if she'll have me. I'm going to ask her tomorrow, in the cold light of morning. Will you come to the wedding?
I think you're off your head.
Do you?
But he isn't leading man stature anymore. He's playing a shriveled old man. You found, Carey, you found this movie disturbing or
Not
scary?
disturbing, just I'd say
Spooky?
the scenes that got me were whenever he would just hear the loud banging.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because it wasn't a door creaking. It was if you were alone in a house and you heard that noise, you know what I'm saying? That is something. That's not like you can't
Yeah, you would freak out.
you can't mistake that
Yeah.
for anything else.
Yeah.
Just the sounds that's more has a bigger impact on me than seeing stuff
Well,
visually, I think.
And the scenes in this, I think they help build it up, especially like I said, you have George C. Scott. He's a very good actor. And when he's going through the house, you're hearing these noises and he's just, I've always seen him as, a gruff, kind of, General Patton,
Right.
but he also looked kind of concerned. You say a big guy like that and he's kind of concerned. It's like, what is going on here in this house? And what is he going to end up finding? And I love how this movie is shot.
It's a beautiful looking movie.
It is. It's very well done, and his acting helps build that tension, I think. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I guess the only not to be a spoil sport or a dick about it, but I get the feeling when I watch a movie like this that first of all, it was the obvious inspiration is The Omen. You get a big Hollywood star to do a supernatural type thing, and it involves, just as The Omen does, a changeling, a baby being switched, right, or a child being switched. That's the opening scene in The Omen. And it also involves people who are in positions of power or authority, right, in the government. There's sort of a conspiracy aspect to it. But it seems to me that whereas The Omen had a very precise script, everything followed very neatly. It may be an absurd story, but it was very tightly written. This one is kind of sloppy in that it has a lot of unnecessary stuff. They waste a lot of opportunities. Like, for instance, they want to have the scene after the opening credits. They want to have that scene of him sort of wandering around Lincoln Center because it's a Canadian film. And they want it to look like an American film. So they figure that'll make this look like a big American production. If we have this big American star and he's in obviously an iconic location in New York. But all that stuff is really wasted because we understand that the guy is going to be sad after his wife and daughter are killed.
Yeah.
And it's there are scenes later in the movie that would have been better at the beginning of the movie. There's sort of unnecessary stuff. They wanted to start in Manhattan, and they wanted him to be leaving Manhattan right away. So they have him go to this sort of halfway place. He ends up with his friends. And there's a scene where they introduce his friend and his friend's wife and his friend's kid, and they have a conversation. It's like, why is this in this movie? Why didn't he just go from where he was to the house that he's going to be living in?
And I'm surprised that it did kind of move fast. That's one thing that did surprise me. And you're right. There's scenes like that are like, what the hell is this doing? I was surprised it went from the mother and daughter dying. Like I said before, there was no like hospital scene. There was no funeral scene.
All right.
But it shows him going through his thing, and then he goes to this place and this place. But I did feel like, yeah, it's kind of a slow thing, but not really. I mean, they kind of, moving to this spot, and it didn't really take that long. You know what I mean? Like I expected it to take longer.
Well,
so that's just me.
I didn't find it boring. I enjoyed it both times that I've watched this film. I've enjoyed it. It's atmospheric and it's always fun to watch George C. Scott. But it just struck me that with films like The Exorcist and The Omen, they sort of finely tune the story so that everything counts. And the stuff later in the movie is more effective if the proper groundwork has been laid. Nothing that happens in the rest of the movie has anything to do with those scenes in Manhattan, right? There's no point to the scene where he is greeted by the doorman and the doorman gives his condolences or says, if anything you need. There's no point to the scene with him talking to his maid or housekeeper when she drops the ball. All that stuff could have been done away with. My version of the story is you take that scene later in the movie where he's teaching the class, which is wasted where it is. I mean, what's the point of that scene, right? It shows us that he's a good teacher. It shows us that a lot of people want to be in his class. I mean, what's the point of that? But if you take that scene and you move it to the beginning of the movie, you have his wife and his kid die at the beginning. You have the titles. Then it's 5-6 months later. It's the first time he's going back to class. He's teaching for, just like Leonard Bernstein used to. He gives talks to young people about music. So this is the first time he's returning after his, he's finished grieving, and he's returned to class, and it doesn't go well. There's a big crowd, and it looks like he gets off to a good start, and he's, talking away, and then suddenly he sees somebody in the crowd, in the audience, that reminds him of his daughter or his wife, and he stops, and he says, and you can see George C. Scott doing this, he says, "Class is dismissed," and everybody sort of sits there stunned, and he says, "Get out," and then we cut to him sitting alone at night in his dark apartment, staring out the window, and his friend, the guy that showed up for that pointless scene in the version that was actually produced, he shows up at the door. He's a representative of the university or the institution that has hired Russell, the composer that George C. Scott plays, and he says, the kids thought you were drunk. "I'm not drunk. I was never drunk," And the guy said, and he could say, "Well, the university is paid you this commission to come up with this new score." "I can't work here. Everything around here reminds me of them." And he said, "I got a solution for you. I'm in touch with this historical society in Seattle. They got a big house where they're willing to let you, just for the pleasure of having you in the place, they'll let you take over the place for the whole winter. You can go there, you can finish your composition, and you can get away from here and forget about bad memories." Next scene is him being shown around the house by Trish Vanderveer. Not all this nonsense with him sitting around with friends in some sort of in-between place. That's a wasted scene. So, but just by restructuring stuff and using stuff that's actually in the finished film, they could have had a much more dramatic story.
For sure.
Most ghost stories and haunted house stories, once you get the person in the house, you want to keep them there, right? I mean, in The Shining, they don't have the Torrance family going out shopping at the local mall, right? Once you're in the house, the idea is to keep you there, because part of the effectiveness of a ghost story is that the person who is experiencing it may or may not be interpreting things correctly. They may not be right in the head. He's a person that just had lost his wife and kid. So he may be more susceptible to hallucination or because of his depression. And so that would always be on the mind of the audience. Are we really seeing this, or is this something that's just going on in his mind? Instead, what happens in the movie is he sort of becomes like a Sherlock Holmes character, just investigating this boy's death. And I don't see why he would care. They had that business of him running to the airport and trying to stop the senator from getting on his plane and waving the medallion at him. There's all sorts of problems with that scene. First of all, 1980 was before 9/11, obviously, but there were plenty of hijackings and plenty of assassinations. You can't just drive up to a senator as he's getting on a plane, and start harassing him. And also, what is his motivation for doing that? What did he think the senator would say? Why is the senator a villain in this? The senator doesn't know anything about what happened.
Yeah, he
senator was a little boy. Right.
Yeah, and they vilified him, and it's like he didn't know.
The only villain in this story is the father, who presumably is long gone, right? The father who drowned the little boy.
Yeah.
So what did he expect to accomplish? Did he expect the senator to say, "Oh, you crazy person who comes screaming at me when I'm getting on my plane. Come on, let me see what you have
talk
for
to you a minute."
Right. Then they try to suggest that just from that brief glimpse, and Melvin Douglas turns a little bit and sees George C. Scott screaming at him from a distance, and he's waving something in his hand. And we're supposed to believe that Melvin Douglas immediately recognized that that's the same medallion that he's wearing.
That he has on, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, why does he care so much?
Why does George C. Scott care, and why does Melvin Douglas care?
Yeah.
Because the senator has no reason to believe, none of this is on his mind. It's not like, oh, suddenly the truth is out. He doesn't know anything about this, right? So some crazy guy comes to the airport and waves a medallion on him, and right away he's sicking his police officers on the guy. And
Yeah.
that scene is a throwaway as well. Same problem. Why should we see that police officer as a villain? He's taking the direction from the senator who says some person's trying to blackmail him. But when he
Yeah.
shows up at the place, and they got the guy who played a Klingon on Star Trek to play this part, but he's not a bad guy. He's doing his job, right? And as far as he knows, this guy is trying to blackmail the senator. But why would the senator think he's trying to blackmail him? Blackmail him
Yeah.
about
What did the senator do?
Yeah, right. He didn't
He's
do
like, they
anything.
found that girl in the lake.
And they had that other scene earlier where the woman at the historical society is calling the senator. And that doesn't really make sense either, because first she's, the house doesn't want anybody to live there, all that sort of bullshit, which is not the sort of thing you would expect to hear from a rational person. And but that's the way she is in one scene. And then the next time we see her, she's calling the senator, oh, somebody's investigating you. Why would she think that there's any information that would need to be protected? Is she calling the senator to say that house you used to live in is haunted and somebody's investigating that? Or is she calling to say, I know that you aren't really the guy's kid and the original kid was drowned and somebody's looking into it? Obviously, that's not the case, right? She doesn't know about that. So why is she doing that? It doesn't make sense. It seems to me that the screenwriter here is sort of coasting on the fact that all of these scenes are things that we've seen in other movies. So he's expecting us to just accept it without thinking about it. But I mean, those seem like that. What they should have done is put George C. Scott in this place and allow him to interact with the ghost. And they really needed a second ghost here, not just one. You need two. You need the boy's ghost, and you also need the father's ghost. And the way I would reimagine it is the boy's ghost is haunting people who live in the house because he wants to reveal that the father murdered him. And the father's ghost is stuck around the house to keep people out so that they won't hear what the little boy's ghost has to tell them. So just like in Hell House, you're never really sure which ghost is doing what. It's not just one ghost because the little boy's ghost, it's sort of inexplicable as to why he's behaving this way. He wants George C. Scott to know for what? For what reason? What's the point?
Well, it's kind of like these other movies, well, it kind of remind me, there's a Stir of Echoes where the girl got murdered, but that ghost comes back and talks to Kevin Bacon, or Kevin Bacon's freaking out because this girl ghost keeps showing up, and come to find out, but there again, the villains were still alive. The father and son that killed her were still alive to expose them.
Right here,
this one, like you said, the father's long gone, but I like where you're going with that, because that would have made a lot more sense. And then maybe if you wanted the senator to be a villain, the senator probably found out years later or whatever when he got older.
Right.
And he sees George C. Scott start doing his thing, and he's like, okay, I'm going to send my dudes to shut this guy up because I love my father. I don't care what he did. I don't want him exposed to be a dick, or an asshole that murdered his own son.
Yes. That's the scene that's
like you
missing.
said, he doesn't know. He's like, what the hell is this guy doing?
and actually, by sending the police officer to browbeat George C. Scott, he's confirming, yes, you do have it on, you have stuff on me. Whereas if he just ignored it, who would ever believe a story like that, right? The other problem is, as I say, you want to try to keep people in the house. Right? Once you get the haunting started, you don't want people going off different places. You don't want scenes of people driving around. That adds to the production value, makes it look like a big fancy movie, but it lets the air out of the film. Why is the well in somebody else's house?
That's what I couldn't figure out.
Because you're stuck then introducing a whole new set of characters later in the thing. They have the scene early on where he finds the room. The room is hidden behind shelves, which is a Rosemary's Baby reference. If you remember Rosemary's Baby, she has to take all the towels off and take the shelves down in order to get into the other apartment. I would say that should have been saved for the well. There's no reason, no conceivable reason why somebody, after they commit a murder, they kill a small child, and then they leave the room exactly the way it was with the wheelchair and with all this evidence that proves that such a child existed, and they just put a bunch of shelves in front of the door. I mean, but if the room is just a closed room that's not used in this enormous house, that would sort of make sense. And when he finds the room, he's just led up all those flights of stairs and finds the room that sound is emanating from. That would make sense. But you wouldn't still have the wheelchair there, right? They had the wheelchair there because they want to have that fairly ridiculous scene with the wheelchair chasing.
Yeah.
So save that for later. Save that for when he's going to the basement and looking around and he finds some little cubby hole, and then he goes inside and he finds the well. And that has to be done just by himself. The suspense should be, what is he going to find? What's going to happen to him? There's really no menace in this film. We never really feel like anybody is in danger, right?
Yeah.
Which is a real difference from The Omen, where at any moment some pane of glass can cut your head off and spikes running through people.
Someone hanging herself at a birthday party.
Well, going back to why the ghost is there, I just assumed it was the find my body and put it in a proper burial so I can go on to the afterlife, whatever, that sort of storyline.
But if that's the case, then that's another scene that we really should have seen in the film, right? There should have been the medium that they bring in should say that this ghost won't be able to rest until he's taken from the scene of the murder. If it was in the house,
Right.
should have been in the house. Take him out of this unholy place so he can go on.
What did you think about the seance scene with the automatic writing and all that? I thought
that was reasonably effective.
Pretty good.
Yeah, that was reasonably effective. The scene with him reviewing the recordings, that's a ripoff from The Exorcist. Right?
Yeah.
And not really as effectively done. I mean, the sounds that Jason Miller hears when he's reviewing the tapes of him talking to Reagan still, send a chill down my spine. But this, in here, it's just a voice, it doesn't really, I'm also not really clear on why the ghost would leave these messages on a tape recording instead of just letting his voice be audible during the seance. I mean, what's the point of that? It seems like a lot of the scenes are just filler. They're just
but there was one scene that I didn't understand, and it was I guess he had some of his students that were playing his piece that he's writing. They're playing for a couple minutes, and then they stop, and then it cuts to them packing up in their car and leaving. And I was like, it was like just two short scenes, like they just edited together, and it didn't make sense.
I don't even remember that scene. Maybe I was dozing off.
Yeah.
No, but that just proves your point. There's a lot of stuff in here that didn't need to be in here.
Yeah.
Like that right there. I mean, I sat there and I watched it. Of course, I was kind of getting drowsy myself a little bit at certain points, but it's forgettable. You don't want a bunch of scenes that are forgettable. You want scenes that are gonna just like I've sat through boring movies before, but I'll tell you what, they had a couple of scenes in there like wow, that sticks with you. And this one, just like you said, it's just filler, and it's like there's not a lot of scenes that really stick out in this.
Well, it seems to me that what it needed to have a couple of extra drafts of the script, but you can't really be sure with a movie like this how exactly the deal came together. Apparently, originally the writer of the original story is somebody who was basing this on some supposed actual haunting.
Yeah.
I think that they were trying to be too faithful to that story. They should have said, okay, well, that's just a starting point. That's just like every other fucking ghost story we've ever heard. We need to finely tune this so that every scene builds the story and makes it more dramatic, because that's what we're really talking about here. The dramaturgy is weak. They're not really making each scene pay. It's just, isn't George C. Scott, boy, he commands the screen. He's always interesting to watch, which is true. But the things he's saying most of the time in the movie are not really, like they have that whole wasted business. After they have this whole set of characters that they bring in, the mother and the daughter, who live in the house which is on the land where they built the well.
Yeah.
That he buried them. And that means that in order to get there, we have to have all those scenes of him at the surveyor's office or wherever the fuck it is, the house, the county records office, talking to a guy who has all the stuff laid out for him. In this book, you can see the houses. This is boring stuff, And it's not only boring, it's something that we've seen in plenty of other movies done better than that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's similar to the sort of research that you see Darren McGavin doing in The Night Strangler, the TV movie that launched the Kolchak series. They have those scenes of the guy going looking at old newspaper articles. Maybe it's never done well, but in this, it's particularly poorly done. They're going for a very specific thing that they want to find in 100 years worth of newspapers. And they just so happen on the first page, they look at, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for. And then they come away from a little bit of research and they know the whole story. The whole thing opens up and they can explain the whole thing about the wills or whatever, and the little boy being drowned, blah, blah, blah. Say that's too easy. And it's also too complicated a thing. All that sort of motivation for a ghost haunting should be a little more straightforward, because what do you do with all that information? What is he supposed to do?
Do you think it would have been like a better film if it was just the haunting all the way up, and then at the end, that's when he finds the body, and then you find out, oh, this is what happened. I'm saying, like, just kind of wrap it up at the end with why the body's in there, the guy killing his kid and all that. But just leave the rest of the movie we don't know what's going on. It's just a haunting at this point. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I want to say what needs to be done with a script like this is you have to ask yourself, first of all, who is George C. Scott's character? Surely they don't want us to think that it's just George C. Scott. Right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a person. It's supposed to be a person who has some qualms or weaknesses that might make his character interesting, right? So he's just lost his wife and his daughter. He finds himself in this new place, and there's this very attractive young woman who is showing him around. And naturally, she sort of sparks to him. And he's reluctant because he doesn't want to get into a relationship, because anybody goes through an experience like that where they've lost people that they were supposed to be taking care of. This is a theme that you see in a lot of horror movies, right? The parent or the responsible person who, because of their inattention or their ineptitude, somebody in their care ends up being hurt. It's also true of The Exorcist, right? The big issue in The Exorcist is the mother can't help her daughter, right? And Jason Miller is the priest who can't help the priests that are coming to him for counseling. There are people in positions of authority who can't help the people that are in their charge. Chief Brody in Jaws, they had that great scene where the woman slaps his face. You didn't stop my boy from being eaten by the shark. Yeah. You knew that this was going to happen. And of course, it's that provides the spark that makes him go out and fight the shark, right? The humiliation of that and the guilt of that. But in this, there's so much potential. And I don't see where the fact that he lost his wife and child have any bearing on the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I feel like that the only reason they done that was just to get him alone in the house.
Right.
But you could have just said, hey, I'm going to go stay in this house for a couple of months to finish writing and just leave him out. Right. I don't think him losing his wife and daughter, I don't think really pushed his character along.
You keep expecting the haunting that's going on to have some relationship.
Connection to the death of his, but it never did.
Doesn't really, no. I mean, at first they suggest, and this is another example of stuff that really doesn't really need to be in there, they suggest that there's a little girl that got killed by a coal truck in front of the house, and we're thinking maybe it's her that's haunting the house, and then that's thrown aside. Oh, it's not her, it's this other thing. Why is that mentioned? What's the point of that? The only reason I can think they mentioned it is because they want to draw some parallel between his experience with his kid being killed by a truck and the little girl here. But it's a red herring, and it's sort of, we're then left with the actual story, and that doesn't have anything to do with, there's no reason why he should feel any sense of guilt, right? His situation is that his family were killed through an accident. He wasn't responsible. In this case, the father actually drowned his kid. So there's no real similarity there, right?
No. You're right. Like maybe if maybe George, he was driving the car and he lost control and then slammed right into the truck and he's a lone survivor. That would have made a lot more sense. Not stuck in a phone booth, just banging on it. Like, I get what you're saying. It needs a better connection than that.
The other thing is that the attempt to make a villain out of the father, even though dramatically there's no way to make that pay off. We can never bring the guilty verdict home to the father. The father's gone. The problem here is once he discovers that, and it's not really clear, it wasn't clear to me whether that was his vision, he's seeing the little boy being drowned by the father, or if that was something that the filmmakers were showing the audience. But I gather that George C. Scott saw it mentally somehow. It's once you do that, that's the end of the story, right? Once you figure out what the banging is, then where do you go with that? I mean, it's sort of like if you had a Sherlock Holmes story where he's investigating a crime that happened 100 years ago, and there's no way to punish the guilty party, right? Where do you go with a story like that? So it seems to me that it would be more interesting, instead of making it into a detection story, make it into a story that involves a child who is so despondent and distraught at the treatment of his father that he's haunting the house. And then when he behaves inexplicably, here's an angle. Suppose the little boy thinks of George C. Scott as his father.
Oh, yeah.
Suppose George C. Scott
that
is a spitting image of his father, or has the same bearing. And he's torturing George C. Scott because he reminds him of his father who tortured him. And George C. Scott is tortured because of his feelings of guilt at losing his family. So he's there because, in a way, he feels that he deserves to be tortured. Is that a possible?
No, that
could be. Yeah, that would be. I would watch that one.
Yeah, can we see that movie?
Now, what was the deal with like the senator coming into the house at the end of the movie?
Yeah, that's another. The ending
was just
is
kind of like,
yeah.
It was just like, why did he even need to show up? And
right.
Again, like you said, he really didn't have a part in any of it. I mean, so.
And nobody in the movie up to that point has done any astral projection, right? But suddenly he has the ability to send his soul to the house, to walk up the stairs for what? To do what? He's going to drown himself in the bathtub? That business with the fire on the banister, that is so rudimentary. I mean, this is a set, right? And the easiest thing would be to set up a gag like that, little flame things along the banister. And they had the falling chandelier, which doesn't really make much sense, because why suddenly, if the boy is accomplishing his goal of getting Melvin Douglas to kill himself or to die from a heart attack or whatever, why would he also be throwing chandeliers at George C. Scott? When did he become so violent?
Yeah.
That also makes that scene with the cop not work too well. That's one of the weaker death scenes that I've seen in these type of movies. We don't even see it. You just see the car overturned and a hole in the windshield. They wanted to be classy, so they didn't want to do like an OMEN type death scene.
Right.
But that doesn't. The boy really isn't. The little boy's ghost isn't really killing people, right? That's not the reputation the house has. Be careful, because you might end up dead if you hang out there. But suddenly he decides this particular guy is deserving of being killed, and he's going to throw a chandelier at George C. Scott. Hell House, which was written by Richard Matheson, which is the same guy who wrote Stir of Echoes, actually. That's a much better. They made that into a movie with Roddy McDowall, and that's a corker altogether. That's a great movie. Sometime maybe we should cover that. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that.
I don't think I have. Yeah.
I haven't.
But Richard Matheson based the idea of Hell House on The Haunting of Hill House, which is the Shirley Jackson book that they made into The Haunting, which is another great ghost story. And Richard Matheson sort of elaborated on the ideas there, that the house served as a kind of battery, and the spirits were sort of absorbed into the house. And there's a scientist who's developed this sort of machine that's supposed to discharge the spirits from the house. and there's a scene there where the poltergeist activity becomes very violent, and glasses are bursting in people's hands, and the light fixtures are raining down on people. And it's done much better than this because you actually believe that the people are in danger. In this, nobody is going to convince me 10 minutes before the end of the movie that suddenly a chandelier is going to kill George C. Scott. Right? It's not going to happen. And Trish,
do you think the ramping up the fire and the deaths, do you think that was a studio thing?
Oh, well, I don't know if
they're saying, hey, let's make this a little bit more exciting.
I think it was the producers say, we got to do something, right? But fire is not one of the colors that they were using to paint this picture. Water is, right?
All right.
Why are we suddenly dealing with fire? When did the kid become a fire starter? It's because it's something that can be cheaply done and it looks spectacular. I mean, we talked about in the Hammer movies how in Hammer and in the Roger Corman Poe films, that was like always the way the movie ends. Somebody knocks over a candelabra and suddenly the whole place is a castle that stood for like 500 years is burning down somehow. It's made out of stone, but somehow it's collapsing. Anyway, that they figured, well, we need some sort of action in this, so let's have some visual spectacle at the end. But it's very weak, and the Trish Van Devier's character, and she's a terrific actress. I thought her interaction with Peter Falk in the Colombo episode was great. She's no slouch when it comes to acting.
Now, was she married to George C. Scott?
She was, but apparently the difficulties in their marriage resulted in the two of them spending more time together on set than in real life.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Mostly separated, apparently, because George C. Scott was apparently quite a difficult person.
Can I bring something up too on the in the cover? I just looked over at my my iPad here, and it says, "How did you die, Joseph? Did you die in this house? Why do you remain?"
Right.
So like you said, like it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that question that they're asking is the end of the film. That's when the film should end, when we finally figure out why he's there, because that's what happens in Hell House. In Hell House, the climactic scene, which is a doozy, with Roddy McDowall facing down the ghost, that's the powerful man whose ghost is still inhabiting the house, and being knocked off his feet by the force of the ghost. You know, Roddy McDowall, when he really got had his steam up, he could be a real ham. And it's delightful to watch him with the veins popping out on his neck and on his forehead. It's terrific. But there's nothing like this in this movie. This movie, we don't really understand what the motivation for the ghost is, other than revealing his father's crime. And it's not really clear why he would care if George C. Scott is able to convince other people. I mean, what's the likelihood anyway that a ghost would be concerned about the justice system? You know,
Right. Yeah.
As you say, what they needed is to establish that the Melvin Douglas character knew all of this, and then he becomes complicit. And then if the ghost, the little boy wants to somehow get back at him, that makes sense. But the idea of having that scene with George C. Scott and Trish Van Devere going to the home of the woman and going through that long rigmarole of explaining why we're here, and the woman says, "Well, you know, I would never have allowed you to look at my place, but my little daughter just had a dream last night," and blah blah blah. So go ahead, tear the place up. So they tear the place up, and they find a hand, the bones of a hand, which would seem to me to be pretty much that you've proved your case, right? There's the hand. Yeah. But they call the cops. Never a good idea in a ghost story to call the cops.
Yeah.
Because that's tedious stuff, you know, trying to convince, but police officers are all about logic and detection and doing things by the book. And you don't want that in a ghost story. And it makes things more difficult because now that the police are involved, George C. Scott has to leave and then break back into the house to go down and continue to dig.
You find human remains or whatever skeleton, yeah, you call the cops, and then of course they look into it and they excavate whatever else is left.
Right.
But like you said, Why is that in a ghost story?
You wouldn't confront that problem of what you got to do when you find a body if it was George C. Scott by himself in a house down in the basement digging on some dark and stormy night, right? That would be an effective horror scene, all alone in a haunted house, down in the basement, in a hole, and finding whatever, skeleton or whatever. That would be, scary, to put it simply.
Yeah.
But doing that in a crappy looking home, I guess they shot that part on location, with the mother and the daughter, and I guess who do they bring in, a son as well?
Yeah, the son came in.
Yeah.
Then there's cops there, and then it's like a fucking party.
Yeah.
This isn't scary. There's no mood or tension to that at all. So all of that is wasted stuff. And it also means that we have to do stuff over again. And you're dealing with a poorly structured script when there's that sort of redundant action, when people have to break into the same place twice. We already did that. We already went through the process of gaining access to this place. He told his whole story to this woman. We had to listen to her whole fucking story. We had to, and now we're going to have to do it again. We have to break into the place a second time. Why didn't you just have him break into the place in the first place? Right? Why go through all that rigmarole? And then we have to have a scene. Here's another sort of rule. If you want scenes of hauntings to be effective, we have to know the people. We have to be introduced to the people who are being haunted, right? Here we have a scene where the woman mentioned her daughter, but we didn't see her yet. We only see her on the night when she's being woken up by the sound of the ghost, right? We can't relate to that little girl because we're just meeting her.
Yeah.
We don't know who she is, and we don't care. We're not invested in the character. So there's no suspense there. And that really is the key problem with the film, is there's really no great feeling of suspense. It's spooky and creepy, and it's well shot, and the acting is okay, but it's not really scary, it's not really dramatic. It's kind of limp, And the ending scene, again, somehow, George C. Scott, they escape the burning house, and he's seen Melvin Douglas's astral body stalking up the stairs. So the first thing that occurs to him, we must race to the senator's mansion. Why? I mean, isn't that a resolution? If that's the senator's ghost or spirit or whatever, that must mean he's pretty much, the guy looks like he's practically dead anyway.
Yeah. Pretty old dude.
So why would they be racing to the guy's mansion? What do they think they could do? They're going to save him? And they drive up practically to his front door. And they're actually there sitting on his front step when they're bringing the body out. Apparently there's very bad security at the senator's mansion.
Yeah.
And nobody says to George C. Scott as he's slumped on the guy's front doorstep. And we said, what the fuck are you doing here?
Yeah.
Who the hell are you?
A lot of holes. You're right. There's a lot of holes in this. Like, you see a guy just sitting on the steps of Senator's house. Okay, whatever.
What is Trish Van Devier's arc here? What has she gotten out of any of this? She's just sort of a space holder,
All right, yeah.
She's the female lead. That's disappointing because she's a terrific actress, and I would like to have seen something more there, some sort of wisdom, right? Like she could help George C. Scott deal with what is going on, help him explain it, instead of just being somebody who's standing nearby. And they go to the trouble of introducing her mother, who's the flying nun actress, who's a very unusual looking woman. And I kept thinking, well, surely she's gonna be weird in some way. Maybe maybe she's a medium as well, or she has psychic powers or something, because she looks like she should. I mean, she was hanging around with a flying nun, so anything is possible, right? They go to the trouble of introducing her and letting us know that that's Trish Van Devier's mother, and none of that goes anywhere. That mother doesn't play an important part in the film at all. Just sort of stands around and looks strange.
Yeah, maybe the Trish Van Devie, maybe she should have been either the psychic, like the medium that he had come over, or maybe she should have had some kind of been related to the family in some way. That would have
Well, that's the
connect her
sort
to
of,
the story a little bit more.
right. That's the sort of thinking that you need. You need to start thinking, how can we make this character relevant to this story, right? What is it about her that would make her useful in a ghost story? And maybe it could be something like she's had some experience similar to what the little boy had. So she has some sympathy for the child, or the child has some sort of connection to her, so she can understand she's sort of on his wavelength. She can interpret for George C. Scott, because he's obviously not the guy that a ghost of a little boy would talk to freely, right? Because he's a person that even a grown man would have a difficult time talking to freely. He looks like a fucking, like he's going to rip your head off. Most of the time. So Trish Van Devier's character is the sort of go-between. He can't understand what the boy's ghost is doing, but Trish Van Devier's character can interpret it. She can understand it because she's on his wavelength. So that would make her useful to the story, right?
Right.
But as it is, she just gets to play the crying female. And there's really no consequence. I mean, there's that scene there where they say that she's lost her job and they've canceled the lease on the house. And that doesn't have any real impact, because you're thinking, so what? He's a wealthy guy. Presumably she is as well. It's not like they've been delivered some terrible death blow. He lost the house.
Right.
He lost the lease to a haunted house. I mean, I don't think anybody. But anyway, so I think that's the big problem. The need to sharpen the script was where they sort of fell down, and they seem to be trying to throw in references to other movies, The Omen, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, which were the usual suspects around that time. That's what everybody was trying to imitate. And that probably was the wrong. They needed an original idea, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like studios get involved a lot and have them add exposition. Make sure people understand what there's going on. make the characters say it 5 times. Right. But hopefully, maybe they can fix all that when they do the reboot, which apparently has been in development since. Oh,
they're doing another one?
Oh, really? Well, it says it's in development since 2020. So, maybe it's not happening. That's the thing
with this movie. I don't see a problem in redoing this one or having a remake of this one. But there's some movies that are just, you shouldn't touch, which they do a lot of. But this one, they could have made it a little bit better. But I just wonder how I don't know what actors would be a part of this, or I don't know. Hopefully they listen to this episode and get some notes.
I'm sure they will,
because that's what that needs. A lot of that is missing in this movie.
As long as they leave in the noise and the ball bouncing down the steps,
which is
the two creepiest parts. Yeah.
Another reference to another horror movie. That's Mario Bava's Kill Baby Kill.
Yeah,
a little girl, the ghost of a little girl that haunts a town, and she's preceded in some scenes. We see her carrying a little ball, and some of the scenes you see the ball rolling out before she shows up. So they took that idea from Kill Baby Kill.
Yeah, there was something creepy about that ball rolling down the steps and him taking it and throwing it in the river, and then he comes back and here it comes back down the steps again. So that was really good.
Well, that was an effective scene. Yeah.
So if they could leave that and the noise in and not show, because they're gonna have CGI.
Well,
ghost kid floating around.
Well, in some aspects, that probably would have helped this movie a little bit. I think. To see kind of an apparition. I don't know.
You got to see less.
Well, I mean, like a certain scene, like maybe the in reveal scene, you see, the kid ghost or whatever. You don't see it through the whole movie. I'm just saying, like at the end, that probably would have been pretty cool. And they had the technology back then, didn't they? I mean, when was Poltergeist made?
They wouldn't have done it with CGI, but they certainly could have done ghosts. I think that probably the experience of the past 10 or 20 years since we've had CGI suggests that you probably are better off doing ghosts in traditional fashion rather than using CGI. CGI ghosts I mean, CGI is great for things like spaceships and, things like that. But for something that's supposed to be so ethereal and amorphous, CGI is too cold. And I mean, everybody knows how you're doing it. Everybody can recognize CGI. One of the things about Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula that I think was really admirable was they did all these special effects the old-fashioned way.
In camera.
Right. Old techniques are the most effective for a supernatural story. For a science fiction story, it's a different thing.
You can't get away with that.
I mean, when you look at the remake that they did of The Haunting, which is filled with CGI, that's not completely lousy. I mean, frankly, it was
the one with Liam Neeson, right?
I guess it was Liam Neeson.
Yeah, you're right.
And
but that came out in like 2000, 2001.
Right. So they had they were working on. They had the technology to do the. I guess in that they had the. What was it? A topiary that comes alive, or they have statues?
Something like that.
In Tim Burton's dreadful Dark Shadows thing, again, same problem. Using CGI to represent supernatural things doesn't work. It just looks like CGI. So I would recommend against that. But I think what they really need is, well, first of all, I don't know if you strip away all the bad things, even though we've been able to construct a somewhat better story as we've been talking. I think if you stripped away all the stuff that doesn't really work in this movie, you might just as well go and write your own original ghost story.
You're right. Yeah.
There's not much here. The key thing is to, as far as I'm concerned, is to get the person in the place and to and leave them there and let
keep them there too. Yeah,
right.
Don't.
Because here they're going all over the place and they're visiting the map office and they're taking drives. They have that long scene where they go to the historical society and they're standing on the patio, looking with the streets on either side, which was a beautiful shot. But I don't know why we're watching it in this movie.
Right. Yeah.
It's a Canadian production. So they wanted to put in a lot of eye candy. They wanted to put in a lot of attractive locations. So if you put all that stuff into this film, it makes it feel like a big, expensive Hollywood movie.
Right. Yeah.
That seems to be what they were trying to do. And it worked, because I think this was the most successful Canadian production up to that point. And it's considered, according to the Wikipedia article on it, an influential Canadian film, or the most influential Canadian film, which doesn't sound right to me, because David Cronenberg was doing his movies, and I would think he would probably be the most influential Canadian filmmaker. I can't think of anybody else that comes close.
Yeah, I was trying to find the box office numbers, but I can't seem to find them on. I guess IMDb, you got to pay a subscription now to get all the good information.
Well, according to the Wikipedia article, it was successful. It doesn't give a precise amount. The critics liked it, apparently. It was well received by the critics. But George C. Scott seems to be one of those actors who, maybe like this film, never realized his full potential.
Right, yeah.
Seems to me he was always, particularly at this time in his life, he was doing a lot of movies that sort of were misses, good, well-intentioned, seemed like a good idea at the time movies. And that really was true from the 70s on for him. He did Patton, which was this enormous success.
Yeah.
He won the Oscar, he turned it down. He did Dr. Strangelove before that, I guess. And that was a tremendous success, right? So he had two really great films under his belt. He was highly regarded as a stage actor. And then he started to do some rather weak movies, like he did The Day of the Dolphin, which was Mike Nichols' first big bomb after The Graduate. Well, actually, Catch-22 might have been unsuccessful as well. But Day of the Dolphin was a particularly embarrassing failure because it was such a silly movie. It's a movie about dolphins that are being trained to assassinate the president.
What?
It was a prestigious film. They spent a lot of money on it because Mike Nichols had just had one of the biggest hits of all time with The Graduate. That was an enormous hit. So they lavished a lot of money on. George C. Scott was in it, so a lot of money was spent on a movie about a president being at risk from a dolphin.
You're right. Now, when it comes to George C. Scott, I would say that, like, I mean, he's known for Patton or whatever, My favorite performances from him is obviously
Exorcist 3.
Exorcist 3.
Oh, no, yeah.
12 Angry Men, and then his version of Christmas Carol that he was in.
Oh, that was terrific.
Those are those are the three that whenever you say his name, that's what comes to mind. Other than Patton, but that's like, everybody knows him for that.
And it's a good, solid production of that story. It's
oh yeah,
it
one
does
of my favorites.
Also a ghost story, and it does all the things in that this movie fails to do, which
should
is
have done, yeah.
precision and storytelling and clarity and character motivation and the consequences of things, but he also did Exorcist 3, which and he also did the Hindenburg. So it looks like he was sort of looking to get in on whatever was voguish in Hollywood at the time. Like the Hindenburg came late in the disaster film cycle. And even though most people would have said, a story about a dirigible that blows up and is completely gone in the space of a minute, that doesn't really give you much material to work with as a disaster movie, right? Most disaster movies, the disaster happens at the start of the movie, and then you have people trying to survive the rest of the movie. The whole movie, everything's fine until the ship blows up at the end.
Right.
It wasn't a terrible movie, but it was certainly, it was not a great idea. And he did They Might Be Giants, which is kind of an interesting movie, but it's not really. Have you ever seen that one?
I don't think so.
No, I haven't seen that one either.
That's the movie that they got the name for the band from. You've heard that the band, They Might Be Giants. George C. Scott plays a judge or a lawyer who is mentally ill and comes to believe that he's Sherlock Holmes. He's assisted in his adventures by Joanne. What was Paul Newman's wife's name? Joanne Wood.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, she plays a psychiatrist whose name coincidentally is Dr. Watson. And when I sat down to watch this a couple of years ago, I managed to find a copy, and I thought to myself, I've been waiting for years to see this. I tried to rent it when it came out on VHS, and the tape I got was defective, so I only got like 10 minutes into the movie. But the first 10 minutes are great. So I was waiting for years to when can I get another copy of this? And the first 10 minutes are great. When you watch this, you're thinking, this is brilliant. A crazy guy who thinks he's Sherlock Holmes, and it works. He actually is like Sherlock Holmes. But then, almost as if they fired the writer and brought in somebody new, right in the middle of the movie, the whole thing goes to shit. Because they have him become a ridiculous character. Like he's sneaking along the streets with his magnifying glass, and things like that. Silly stuff. There's one scene where he's looking for clues in a trash can in Times Square, and he actually gets into a fight with the garbage man, and he's rolling around in the street amid the trash in Times Square. That makes the character look like a fool. I wanted to see a story where the crazy guy actually is Sherlock Holmes, where he actually is able to solve crimes.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, you guys should check it out. It's worth watching because it is kind of a cult film. And apparently the guys who named their band after it, they were impressed by it. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah. Joanne Woodward was
Joanne Woodward, right? Yes, yeah.
All right, so Martin Scorcese included this movie, The Changeling, in his top 11 scariest horror films. Mr. Poe, where's it land on yours?
Oh, wow. Scary? No, not really. Like I said, we kind of picked it apart, and it's still a decent, ghost story. This was my first watch, so to give a 100%, rating on top scary movie, I can't really say I was scared, but it is decent enough to where I would watch it again.
Yeah, it's a pleasant, if you're in the mood for something spooky with nice sets and nice photography, but it just seemed to me that it's a little bit of a missed opportunity because it could have been great,
Oh yeah, for sure.
And they fall a little short of the mark simply because they didn't work on the script enough, I think, And
after watching again, I think I realized that the creepiness of the sound and then that ball, I think that's what got me.
Mm-hmm.
Watching it, alone in the dark by myself.
Well, that helps.
Watching it the second time during the day with the lights on, didn't have the same effect. All right. So do you put the Changeling on your list?
Of top horror films?
Scariest horror films?
No, I don't know what Martin Scorsese is thinking of there. A couple of times I've seen Scorsese sort of tip his hat to people by mentioning them in those type of lists. Mentioning directors that he likes, or mention films that he feels maybe haven't been appreciated enough, or he's trying to draw attention to them. But I don't really see anything in this movie that strikes me as being particularly remarkable from the standpoint of craftsmanship. It's a good, solid piece of work, but it's nothing startling. I mean, all the films, including Kill Baby Kill, which I assume is also on Martin Scorsese's list, are superior in almost every respect. And I don't even think Kill Baby Kill is Mario Bava's best film, but it's better than this,
Right.
I think.
We'll have to track down Martin's list and see what all he has on there.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that he probably would have listed some Mario Bava films, because that's the type of director that he would have wanted to highlight. He wanted to try to elevate, use his power, which is a good thing. He uses his
Right,
power to try to bring attention to things and people that haven't gotten enough attention. But I don't know, in this case, I don't know what it is about it that he's trying to draw our attention to. Certainly that climax is not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say if anybody was composing a list like that, you would have to put Hell House above it. Hell House is hardly mentioned by anybody, but it's a very unusually shot movie and has an extraordinary synthesizer music score, and has a great cast. And I recommend that over this. So if you haven't seen Hell House, that one you should seek out.
We'll have to track that one down.
Yes.
Yeah.
As a
All right.
general rule, if you see Roddy McDowall in a horror movie, you should watch it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Roddy McDowall was also in Colombo.
Right. We're got to do a Colombo episode.
We should
now.
really, yes.
Yeah.
A lot of ground to cover.
You're gonna bring out the Colombo impression in me.
All right. So, Aaron, where can everybody find you on the internet?
Oh, they can find me at They Call Me Mr. Poe on Instagram, Slasher app, and Twitter as well. And of course, Aaron Poe on Facebook. That's it.
All right. William?
I'm on Facebook under my name, William Hopkins. I have a Demon Resurrection, my film Demon Resurrection, and my film Sleepless Nights, which is upcoming. They both have Facebook pages you can search for. They both have Twitter accounts, but I no longer have an Instagram account, and that's a story that I will tell you in another episode.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Stay tuned.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us here to talk about this movie. And until next week, we will continue to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Cheaply Made.
It has been established that persons who have recently died and then returning to life and committing acts of murder. The unburied dead are coming back to life